The modern pickup truck is more than what we remember it to be. You see, where pickup trucks used to just be utility vehicles driven by people with farms, now the pickup truck is as much a matter of utility as it is a matter of comfort, because people use their trucks as family haulers as much as they do for commercial lugging. Now, to that end, Peugeot, of all brands, thinks that they have a solution in this, the Peugeot Landtrek, with a 1.9 litre turbo diesel up there, all-wheel drive, a class-leading bed, or so they claim, and a class-leading interior, or so they claim. Is the 120,000 ringgit that this car commands worth it? Or are you better off with the established rivals from America or Japan? Well, in this review, we'll intend to find out. But before we do so, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is our review of the 2023 Peugeot Landtrek. Now, before we talk about the utility of the Landtrek, I feel like everybody wants to talk about the way it looks, and so I will. Now, the Landtrek is not a fully developed Stellantis product. Rather, this is underneath a Changan or some variety. That said, however, Peugeot has done the best it can to make this very much a Peugeot truck. So it starts with the very large sort of concave grille replete with the enormous Peugeot Griffith up front, flanked by the Griffith claw-like daytime running lights on either side. Flanking them are a set of LED headlights. However, only the main beams are LEDs, as the high beams and indicators are bulb, and the same goes for the fog lights. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the front end of this truck is rather successful in the sense that it does step away from its Chinese roots and it does look uniquely French. Now, before I move on to the side, I'd like to point out the fact that the Landtrek is very large. I didn't get shorter. This truck is just huge. In fact, compared to the Hilux GR Sport that we also have on test, this thing absolutely dwarfs it. It is taller, wider and longer than the Hilux. In fact, it's taller, wider and longer than most other trucks. And this is likely due to the fact that Peugeot wanted to have a class-leading bed and a class-leading interior. And that size is most evident here, because as you can tell, this truck is huge. Another way you can tell is the wheels. So these are actually 18-inch dual-tone alloy wheels wrapped in Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires, and they look puny because this truck is enormous. Now, what I do appreciate down the side is the fact that both at the front and the rear you have these flared wheel arches, which I think make this truck look really good. I also appreciate the relatively generous use of chrome on the wing mirrors, the door handles, on the window surrounds, and the silver that you get on the running plate and on the functional roof rails, in case you want like a box or something. I also like the fact that you get this sports bar as standard, because as we know, on some trucks, 80/50, this is a cost option. And I think that having a sports bar on a truck kind of completes the rear end look, don't you think? But the back end is where I think the Landtrek is most successful, because you have these rather smart looking tail lights, albeit bulb type units, except for the positioning lights, which are obviously LED. And the reason why I like the way this rear end sort of ends itself is because this tailgate is not a flat piece. There is quite a bit of surface play going on here, and I love the enormous Peugeot badge. Now, if you compare this to what you get from Ford and Toyota, they're a lot more subtle, whereas this is more in your face about it being French. And as a result, this truck has gotten quite a bit of attention because quite a number of people don't understand why Peugeot has a truck. Frankly, I'm kind of struggling right now too. I quite like the rear end and the bumper because I like chrome on cars generally. And as you can see here, you've got the reverse camera integrated into the handle, because this truck comes with a 360-degree camera, which I know is becoming more and more common, but the 360 camera in this is very, very well executed. Now, talking about a truck, we have to talk about the bed. So if you've watched our preview of the Landtrek, you will know that the vehicles that we test drove then did not come with bed liners. This one has it. And on top of that, that standard sports bar also integrates the bed lights, which are also standard. And I think that that is perhaps one of the smartest features I've seen on a truck in quite some time, because the bed liner light on a Toyota Hilux is a cost option, whereas in this, it's standard. And in a Hilux, it's mounted here, whereas in the Landtrek, obviously, it's mounted up there. As a result, it means that when you do have a very large thing back here, that illuminates far better than what you get in the competition, which again is something that I appreciate. Now, talking about the bed itself, this is, as I said, slightly larger than what you get on the competitors, and as a result, it means that you can carry more crap. The other thing that I'd like to mention when it comes to carrying crap are these tie-down hooks, because in most other trucks these are metal, in the Landtrek they are plastic, and in most modern trucks the tailgate is assisted, usually with a hydraulic lift. This is manual and very heavy. But what does a lot of the heavy lifting for the Landtrek, I feel, is this interior, because it feels positively car-like. Now, if you were to compare what happened with the Mazda BT50 versus the Isuzu D-Max, because they're basically the same truck, a lot of the interior was carried over from one truck to the other, which means a lot of shared parts, so it's slightly more affordable to build, etc. But it did mean that the BT50 didn't really feel like a fully Mazda product. Now, the Landtrek, however, does it a lot better, because for starters, you have all of these lovely piano keys, very much like a Peugeot, and you also have the integration of an infotainment system up here, floating on top of the dash, like what you get in other Peugeots. You also get a very Peugeot two-spoke steering wheel, which unfortunately is much larger than other Peugeots. This isn't an iCockpit because the instrument cluster sits sort of within the steering wheel itself. But as far as I'm concerned, like I said, this interior feels very much like a Peugeot. I certainly appreciate the fact that all the buttons and switchgear in here feel like they are tough. They don't feel upmarket. They feel durable, which is what you want in a truck. But despite that, this very car-like cabin continues with this very high-mounted gear selector, these rather ornate-looking door grabs, and again, this Peugeot steering wheel, which is wrapped in leather, and very nice leather at that. Ahead of that sits a couple of analog dials with a digital screen in the middle, giving you most of the information that you need. This infotainment system, while very nice to use, unfortunately only offers wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, although the USB port for it is located very nicely here. In terms of practicality, again, the Landtrek does very well. You have a couple of very large cup holders here, you have a huge central storage bin here, you have enormous bottle holders in the doors, and on the passenger side you even get like a little cup holder right above the aircon vent, which is a very strange placement, but I guess it's nice if you want something to be in your line of sight. You also get dual zone climate control with rear aircon vents, ensuring that rear passengers are very comfortable, and you do get a powered driver's seat, which works very well with the powered passenger seat, ensuring that both front occupants are nice and comfy. Now, one little thing I'd like to note before we move to the back. The problem that I have with this car has a lot to do with the way it drives, so stick around till we get there. But in the rear is where you'll find the Landtrek's party piece, which is its class-leading levels of space. Now, this seat is set up for my video editor, who is considerably taller than I am, because most people are. And as you can see, I still have a decent amount of knee room, and I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat, which means that I actually do have a pretty good amount of space. And as far as I'm concerned, these are pretty much the best rear accommodations I've seen in a truck so far. Because for starters, you've got a couple of aircon vents here, which unfortunately are positioned very low down, but they do move up and down quite a bit, which means even from here, you can actually have them pointed at your face, which is something that BYD can't seem to figure out. You also get a USB port down here, which is quite nice, and you get an armrest with a couple more cup holders in addition to bottle holders you get in the doors. Now, these seats themselves, as you can see, the seat squabs are relatively long for a truck, but they are mounted quite low, which means you will need to stretch out a little bit if you want some under thigh support, but the recline angle is pretty good for a truck. If you rewind about 5 to 7 years ago, companies would be talking about this recline angle going, it's the most human design in the industry. Yeah, but we don't do that anymore because we expect better from our trucks. Now, talking about what we expect from our trucks, or what I didn't expect from a truck, is the fact that these seats are actually more multifunctional than I thought. You can actually fold up the rear seat bases, and so you can use this as more room to load tall cargo that you don't want to get wet, and it even comes with these little straps that you can put over the rear headrest in order to keep them up, and the rear seats actually fold forward to create a through load. No, there's no through loading. It just creates a flat space for you to put more stuff in here should you want to load stuff in your truck, because you know you've got a whole bed. Why wouldn't you just use that? Now the thing about trucks is that as practical as they are, they're not actually closets, they move. And so we have to see what this car is like when it's moving. You know, with me behind the wheel. Now like I said, the Landtrek is very much a lifestyle SUV. And so behind the wheel, in this very car-like cabin, you would expect a very car-like experience, as that's what lifestyle truck buyers expect. So under the bonnet, you've got a 1.9 litre turbo diesel, which produces a decent amount of power and a decent amount of torque, and it's paired to a 6-speed automatic transmission with power going to all 4 wheels, or 2, or low. There's a Borg-Warner transfer system, so you can choose between 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low, depending on the situation that you're in. You can also choose between normal, sport, and eco driving modes, which I think is quite helpful, particularly for a truck that will, let's be honest, spend most of its time in town. Now, when you're driving about town at urban speeds, we're doing about 60 kilometers an hour now, you will find that the Landtrek is actually a pretty civilized place to be. The 1.9 litre does know how to shut up once you get up to speed, although accelerating and so on, it will invite a little bit more noise into the cabin, as is the case with most trucks. But once you are at speed, the Landtrek does know how to settle down. You get very little in terms of engine noise, although wind noise is well suppressed, road noise not so much, and I suspect that that is down to the all-terrain tires. Now, a lot of trucks within this segment tend to use highway terrain tires in order to offer slightly better grip, but more importantly, improved NVH levels. But for whatever reason, Stellantis has decided that the Landtrek should be specified with rather aggressive all-terrain tires. Now, that aside, the overall characteristics, or rather the overall character of the Landtrek is pretty civilized. So for starters, you get a relatively decent ride. Those big, thick tires does mean that it does a very, very good job of soaking up primary lumps and bumps pretty well, and secondary ride is okay. All trucks tend to be a little bit crashy over bigger undulations and stuff like that, because the back end without its weight tends to be a little bit stiff, and it's really much the same in the Landtrek as well. That said, however, that is nothing that cannot be remedied by a couple of bags of sand, which is usually what I've done in the pickup trucks that I've owned in the past. Beyond that, the Landtrek is, like I said, very civilized. I would have expected something, especially with Chinese agricultural roots, that this would be a bit more agricultural and rough and, you know, that sort of thing. But I think that Peugeot has done a pretty good job at trying to tame what is ultimately a work truck, because this is, like I said, relatively refined and relatively comfortable. And in terms of space, the Landtrek offers quite a bit, because you have a decent amount of legroom, although admittedly the seats are a little bit too low for my comfort. But this is nothing that you wouldn't expect out of basically any pickup truck, really. So the Landtrek doesn't really offer any more than any of the other trucks, aside from obviously space, both for cargo and for people, but it also doesn't offer any less, except in one key area, and that is active safety. Now, if you've seen my preview of the Landtrek, you would have heard me moan about the fact this car does not come with any active safety features whatsoever. It's only got, I think, a very basic front-facing camera, although it does have a really good 360 cam. That said, it doesn't come with blind spot monitoring, AEB, adaptive cruise control, rear cross traffic alert, or any of that stuff. And for a lifestyle truck, particularly one that is going to be spending the majority of its time in town, that to me feels like a little bit of a disappointment, because I feel that a truck of this nature ought to offer a little bit more in terms of active safety, given where this truck will be used most often. Its competitors, most notably like the Isuzu D-Max, the Mazda BT50, as well as the Ford Ranger, all offer active safety of some degree in their smaller engine variants, whereas in the Hilux, for example, you have to step up to a 2.8 litre, either the Rogue or the GR Sport, in order to get all the bells and whistles. And what kind of irritates me especially about the Landtrek is the fact that it's got these little markers at the corner of the wing mirrors, as if to say that it has blind spot monitoring, when in reality it is just wing mirror heaters. Now, does that mean that I wouldn't recommend the Landtrek? No, not at all. I think that the Landtrek is a fantastic truck, especially with the amount of space in here and the amount of standard specification. Yes, it may not have things like blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert and so on, which admittedly does rankle ever so slightly, but the thing is a lot of truck buyers don't seem to care about that sort of thing. What they'd be more concerned about is things like space and after sales. And in that regard, Burmaz does offer excellent after sales service, which means Landtrek owners will be able to enjoy the exact same level of care. And most importantly, in terms of space, the Landtrek is very hard to beat. If there were certain areas that I would make some changes, it would most certainly be to active safety. I feel like the Landtrek would hugely benefit from things like adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist and blind spot monitoring, simply because this is ultimately going to be an urban truck. And urban trucks need things like that, especially blind spot monitoring in a truck this big, because God, it's so easy to lose a little biker in your blind spot. But aside from that, the Landtrek seems like a very complete package, and for the money that it's asking for, this is ultimately a fully loaded mid-range truck. And to that end, it's quite hard to beat. If you choose to ignore the Landtrek because it's a Peugeot, then well, that lies on you. You proceed at your own peril, because this is ultimately a good truck. And if you see it as such and you evaluate it as such and you see what this truck is capable of, I think you'll quite like it. The same way I've come to quite like it, even though I'm really not a truck person. In any case, that's been our review of the 2023 Peugeot Landtrek 1.9 litre Allure. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.